This is Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in the Los Angeles area, joined by Wayne Powell. He's a councilman in the city of Manhattan Beach. And I want to speak with you about the drought, which I would argue is probably over, given what we've seen in terms of rains in Southern California. But let's go back before this rainy season. How was it for the beach cities during the worst times of the drought?
Well, practically all of the beach cities had water conservation programs in effect, in addition and beyond what the state was mandating.
Sure.
And our residents did an outstanding job of water conservation.
And I can imagine it must have been very frustrating, given that the ocean's right there, and yet we know that water is not necessarily potable, but there were tremendous efforts to conserve water. Now that we have a lot more water, both in the Sierras in Northern California and now in Southern California as well, how are the residents reacting? Has our mindset changed so that even though it's a better year in terms of water, we're not being frivolous?
Actually, before the drought, water conservation was in effect in the city of Manhattan Beach.
I see.
So, but you're right, residents are very concerned because in Northern California, the drought's been declared over.
Right.
In Southern California, it's about to happen.
Right.
And they see desalination plants that are idle and costing ratepayers.
Okay, so let's
lots of
go
money.
there. Let's talk about desal, because there's no doubt that desal has become a very popular tool in the shed when looking at the portfolio of water options. Before we talk about what you think of a particular desal plant, and we'll go there, let's talk about desal generally. Because it has been popular. I mean, we know in San Diego, the Carlsbad project recently opened, biggest in the Western Hemisphere, cost almost $1 billion of private money, took a long time to get online, but it's providing San Diego County with 50 million gallons daily, or about 7% of the need for 3 million San Diego residents. So what's your sense generally about desal, without talking about a specific project?
Well, that plant is producing way too much water. They've filled up their storage facilities. They're actually putting water back into the ocean, and ratepayers are paying big time.
Because we know, for example, that when this plant went online, San Diego customers, their bills have risen about $5 to $7 a month. But look, I understand, sir, that this has been a wet year and that we are releasing water because of its the year being better. But we had 5 terrible years. And so I guess, again, broadly speaking, not talking about a plant we'll get to in a second, sure. Should we not be forward thinking and look at desal as part of a cafeteria of options?
Yes, and that's a great point. There are so many great options. The first and foremost is water recycling for commercial and industrial use. And the West Basin Municipal Water District does an excellent job of that. And statistics show that if they did 10% more recycling, there wouldn't be any need for a desal plant.
So you know that in the 90s, when we had another drought, the city of Santa Barbara looked to open a desal plant known as the Charles E. Meyer Desalination Facility. They spent, $34 million, but then what happened? We got some wet years, and the plant never really went online. But now, during the drought, they're looking to bring it back online at a cost of about $65 million. Right. How does that inform your thoughts about a potential desal plant that we'll get to in a moment in the South Bay?
Well, it just means that desalination, droughts are cyclical, and desalination's a bad thing. It's very expensive, it's not used all the time, and again, when you can do water conservation and recycling, which makes the necessity for a desal plant unnecessary, why bother?
We do know it's expensive. I think that's undeniable. We also know it's energy intensive, and as a result could have impacts on climate change. But what we also know is that given what's perceived to be the success of Carlsbad, despite what you're saying, I mean, we've had a wet year, so this may not be the best year to analyze. there is an effort to open a desal plant in the South Bay, in El Segundo. Explain for our viewers statewide the geography of the coast. We have LAX. What's below LAX?
Well, then you have one water reclamation plant, you have a power generating plant, but you know what? They have not built an industrial complex in the Santa Monica Bay since 1950.
But below LAX is the city of El Segundo.
Right.
And below the city of El Segundo is?
Manhattan Beach.
And below that?
Followed by Hermosa Beach.
And then Redondo Beach. And then do we get to Orange County line, or we're
No, then we get to the Palos Verdes Peninsula.
Got it. And then we go around the bend. So there are discussions about opening, like you said, this desal plant in the South Bay. Some say it could even be bigger than Carlsbad, which was huge. The proposal is to up to 60 million gallons a day. Carlsbad's at 50 million, costing between 500 million and close to $1 billion. I believe that both the cities of Manhattan Beach and Hermosa Beach, which generally aren't aligned, have taken a very similar position with regard to this South Bay desal plant.
Right, they both had unanimous resolutions of opposition, Manhattan Beach and Hermosa Beach. And if you know anything about those two city councils, getting a unanimous decision on anything is a high standard.
So there's no doubt that the two cities to the south of El Segundo are in opposition. El Segundo, though, I presume they are the ultimate, they have the final say. They have to deal with the Coastal Commission and otherwise, but there's not much that Manhattan Beach could do per se.
Well, Manhattan Beach and other cities can and will challenge the environmental impact report that will come out.
Now, when you were just talking about reclamation, were you talking about the Hyperion Water Reclamation Plan?
No, actually,
what is that?
They're the beneficiaries as well, but it's the West Basin Municipal Water District, which actually gets the sewage, raw sewage, treats it into various levels of purity for industrial and commercial uses, and they do an outstanding job, and it keeps that pollution from going into the Santa Monica Bay.
Because as I understand it, 40 million gallons a day from Hyperion is recycled.
They do their own recycling.
They do their own recycling for golf, cooling towers, refineries, and so we see that recycling is part of the solution, the grand solution. So given that we have recycling that's working, and while this may be a wet year, is there a way to look at the proposed desal plant in El Segundo and maybe work with the city? Maybe the plant would be smaller. Because look, I have to admit, sir, I am concerned. I don't know much, the particulars about this plant, but the last 5 years were brutal. Were brutal. And so could one not argue that we need to consider some type of desal solution, maybe not this large?
Well, again, the studies showed that even when we were at the peak of having a severe drought, just 10% more recycling would have supplied all of the needs for the region. So why bother with an expensive...
So what can we do? How do we get more recycling to the region then?
Well,
or within the region?
The question is, why do we need a desal plant in El Segundo? Let's talk about the detrimental impacts to the environment. First of all, the process sucks in marine life because the filters aren't fine enough. It pours out highly concentrated salt brine, which is toxic and creates dead zones. And you mentioned earlier, it uses dirty
energy. We'll have you back. He is Wayne Powell. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is Local Edition.